Beneficence means to do good, to practice kindness, generosity, and charity toward others. It means actively promoting others' well-being. Although most of us would readily acknowledge the importance of doing good for others, in real life, it can feel difficult to consistently feel compassion toward others and behave in ways that help them. Recent years have produced inspiring examples of beneficence, as well as alarming manifestations of polarization and harm. In these challenging times, how should we think about our responsibilities to care for people that we know and love, as well as for others whom we don't know, disagree with, or even feel harmed by? How does caring for ourselves fit into this picture? This year, the Mudd Center's program will address the theme of beneficence, practicing an ethics of care. It will harness the wisdom of prominent and innovative thinkers whose work addresses concepts of beneficence, as well as pathways toward practicing care well. If we aspire to practice beneficence within our personal, public, and professional lives, how can we manifest this value in our actions? How might we increase our capacity for care and compassion? What are some barriers to practicing care for self and others within our complex relationships and within social systems that may not seem to foster beneficence? In addition to our traditional public lectures, this year the Mudd Center's program will include an interactive series of events called Care Labs that will deepen and personalize our exploration of care. Care Labs will be offered by a poet, developmental scientist, a philosopher, educators, a playwright, and a meditation expert. The Mudd Center will produce Care Labs in partnership with departments and programs all over campus. For instance, a collaboration between the Mudd Center, museums at WNL, and the University Library will link the Museum Menagerie exhibit in Watson Galleries with a lecture on the psychology of human-animal relationships and a community pet project. Caring well for others may be the central duty and desire of our lives, and also the most challenging. I hope this program will give us space to contemplate this responsibility from multiple perspectives and set intentions for carrying it out with purpose and sensitivity. All right, welcome everyone. I'm Carla Murdoch, Director of the Mudd Center for Ethics, and this is the fourth lecture in the Mudd Center's series focusing on beneficence, practicing an ethics of care. In September, our series was launched by the philosopher Karen Storr, who discussed Kantian perspectives of beneficence and the values of love and respect. She addressed the importance of helping others on their terms, according to their goals and in line with their dignity. In October, the clinical psychologist and neuroscientist Helen Wang discussed her research on the neurobiological mechanisms underlying compassion-based meditation and methods that have enhanced equity and inclusion in research on meditation. In November, in the series, management professor Oscar Jerome Stewart addressed how the norms of competitive individualism that are embedded in our educational structures may run counter to the value of beneficence and the practice of care. And this afternoon, the philosopher John Lysaker will expand our consideration of beneficence by considering friendship as an inspiration and vehicle for practicing an ethics of care, paying particular attention to the benefits of friendships that bridge differences between us. The Mudd Center's Beneficence program will continue next Thursday, February 9th. Seema Gajwani of the Office of the Attorney General for Washington, D.C., will discuss the promise of restorative justice as an alternative to adversarial processes and approaches to juvenile crime. I hope you'll join us for her lecture at 5 p.m. next Thursday in the University Chapel. As we settle into this space together, I invite you to join me in pausing to appreciate the land that surrounds us and those who have cared for it throughout the generations, the Yisa and their descendants, the Monacan people. We gratefully acknowledge the Native elders who came before us, the vibrant Native communities who make their home here today, and the generations to come. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to Professor John Lysaker. He is the William R. Keenan Professor of Philosophy at Emory University. Professor Lysaker's research centers around phenomena such as the good life, the nature and social function of art, and the nature of self and its fate in schizophrenia. He approaches his work through the interdisciplinary lenses of ethics, the philosophy of art and literature, philosophical psychology, and 19th and 20th century American and Continental philosophies. Professor Lysaker has authored several books and numerous articles exploring the writings of various thinkers, poets, and artists, ranging from the 19th century essayist Ralph Waldo Emerson to the contemporary music composer Brian Eno. His most recent projects focus on friendship, hope, love, and forgiveness. Professor Lysaker earned a bachelor's degree from Kenyon College and a doctorate from Vanderbilt University. Before joining the faculty at Emory University in 2009, he taught philosophy and comparative literature at the University of Oregon. His lecture today is Become Who You Aren't, Friendship as Spectacle. Welcome.
Can everybody hear me? So before I begin, I want to thank you all for having me. This is the first step in what's the next iteration of my work in ethics. My sort of forthcoming book is on hope, trust, and forgiveness. And I was drawn to those because they're curious phenomena where we have to find our way without sort of traditional moral scripts. Convention isn't really sufficient to tell us what to hope for and whether we should trust someone or whether we should forgive. And they're not really voluntary or involuntary. Sometimes we'd like to hope, trust, and forgive, and we can't. And these make them unusual, since we tend to think that really responsibility is about what you have control over, the voluntary, And then you're looking for a clear rule or principle or at least a convention to orient you in the world. And I've come to believe that ethical life as it's lived really lacks that kind of clear guidance, and there's a lot more burden placed on us as particular persons in particular contexts. And so I'm starting to wonder, how does a conscientious person navigate those more complex scenes? And also hearing about the earlier talk, how does someone learn to care for someone on their own terms? And one of my arguments is going to be that friendship is a principal site where we acquire that ability. And so friendship is an utterly undervalued site for genuine moral growth, and maybe the moral growth we really aspire to if we think that caring about people is caring about them in their irreplaceability, in their singularity, right? And how they're not like everyone else. So so that's sort of where I'm coming from. It's a real honor to be invited to share your work. And as a philosopher whose thought kind of lives and dies in speech, we don't have data. We have good ideas, and they're well put together or they're poorly put together, and it's almost always the latter, as you discover in public. All right? So it's both a generative thing for me as well as an honor to be here. So my talk involves 7 sections, and it will run for about 40 minutes. I timed it. It usually takes a little longer than, for some reason, I don't know why I'm faster at home, but it'll be about 40 minutes. And each section is cast as a kind of shot often used in filmmaking, beginning with a point of view shot, which is taken from the perspective of someone in the action. Hear me addressing you. I then move to what's called an extreme long shot. So if you've ever seen a movie and it starts in the sky and it works into the city and moves down a street and then gets into a building, all right? I'm going to use that for my second section, and that's to locate what I'm doing in ethical thought more generally. I'll then move to some other kinds of shots. I'm not going to explain each one, although I'll announce them. And I end with a fade. And I elected this form because friendship, on my view, cannot be apprehended in a single take, and I thought it was important to acknowledge that formally. But also, I think ethical life is a drama that can only be viewed from within. And so each of these camera angles is within that drama, as opposed to the maybe more prototypical philosophical perspective, which thinks it can take in the whole. So, point of view. When are you at your better? Who is the you that you wish to be? Not just when do you do what you're told or what is expected, but when do you think, perhaps with a thrill, this is the life for me? You, me too, are dynamic multiplicities. We emerge from a dazzling and dizzying interplay of variables such as gender, race, sexuality, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, national identity, native language, generational character, subcultural character, profession, etc. Each of us is positioned in various networks, suffused with synchronic and diachronic relations that are geographic, atmospheric. I imagine many of you felt better today when the clouds lifted, felt maybe more like yourself. Biophysical, interpersonal, interspecies, and institutional in character. Even those who refuse to travel prove worldly. In the broadest sense, we are eco-social through and through. But that isn't all there is to you. How do you inhabit these currents? Conduct them. What do you embrace? What do you refuse? Where do your emphases fall? What befuddles or even eludes your self-understanding? And how do you respond? What do you interrogate, ignore, reinvent, or simply endure? What wearies you, bemuses, thrills? If I knew, I would know you better. For I would know or begin to know your bearing. It's a key word for me, bearing, which denotes 5 different things. A general character, as in generous or cowardly. The carrying of a weight. And enduring, whether you grin or not. an orientation as when you lose or find your bearings, and a generation as in to bear fruit. All five senses allow us to witness and engage some of who we are. So as I ask, when are you at your better, I mean, when and where in your bearing do you find yourself and think, feel too, that's how it's done, it being you. Please sit with this question. If I do not or cannot address our aspirational selves, my effort will come to naught. My point is not Owen Flanagan's, who claims that ethical theories must meet a standard of minimal psychological plausibility. Although I tend to agree with him, even as I doubt that we know all we are capable of, for better and for worse. Rather, as a practice of reflection and inquiry in pursuit of the better, ethics must address and animate our aspirations or fall short. Let me make a similar point by way of lament. I teach in the humanities, which explores critical, expressive, and figurative attempts to make sense of and orient our bearings. In the humanities, you and I are the subject of inquiry. But most of the time, students enrolled in such courses expect and are required to master techniques of reading and writing in the promise that such capabilities translate well into other domains, commerce most of all. Well and good to a degree. But what of the conversations that pertain to your humanity? The histories you carry and conduct in word and deed, the loads that press upon you as you find your way across differential terrains, some vast as the globe, some intimate to the tips. How do you sense and work on futures you inevitably breed at home and afar? Finally, after you've decided not to be that guy, what orients you toward the you wish to be? I know you have answers to these questions, but how often do they converse with the questions and answers posed in our classes? One can present or mimic the subject matter and maintain, untouched by the material, commitments that orient one's life. And that, in ethics, indicates less a missed opportunity than the outline of a satire. Extreme long shot. Ethics is an activity through which we strive to bring our lives into accord with our better selves. I stress its active dimensions because commitments that never see the light of day or the starlight of night are half-hearted, particularly in lives that enable their pursuit. But this is not to favor action over words. Ethics is deliberate. It involves accounting for who we take our better selves to be. That is part of its action. I say this because we already are deliberating when we employ comparative adjectives. Better and good mark assessments that could have gone in multiple directions. The better life is a deliberate one. It accounts for itself as it goes, a point that cannot be refuted without enacting it. You might be thinking, why better and not best? Shouldn't ethics articulate the greatest good, the summum bonum, and order things appropriately? I don't think so. And I say this from a stance both humble and greedy. I doubt we can lay hands on the best we can be. We are multitudes, and the demands we face across our lives often differ, as Aristotle notes. Being a good neighbor is not the same as being a good friend, and while I sometimes think it is, being a good professor is not the same as being a good husband. And even within professor, at least in my case, one is simultaneously a teacher, a member of a department, a college and university citizen, a scholar lucky enough to engage various publics, but also a writer bound to publishing, and so forth. Because I am no one thing, I refrain from any singular sense of what my best or even my good might be. Second, one knows only so much about how to enact one's several facets, particularly in novel circumstances. I have been a professor for over 25 years, and I still discover new ways of enacting the full range of what that role requires. Any best is thus probably not. Finally, becoming better opens new possibilities that require their own experimentation. Our changes become platforms for future transformations that were impossible at early stages. And this is where my greed comes in. Securing a so-called best might settle for second better. When I think about our better selves, I seek conditions that, when realized, stand as advances relative to where we had been and or might have gone. And here better is a stand-in for good, as in good job, or did you have a good day? I'm interested in conditions that, when operative, leave us better off than we otherwise would have been, which gives us a reason to aspire to them. This way of thinking orients Aristotle's claim that few, if any, would prefer a life without friends, all other things being equal, as well as his conclusion that the ubiquity of the preference demonstrates that friendship is a good. As a discipline, and I mean that in more than an academic sense, ethics pursues such conditions, and in a manner that moves ambiguously between invention and discovery. Only after friends have been around a while can we regard them deliberately. And note, even the God of Genesis surveys his efforts, creating light, dividing it from darkness, differentiating land and sea, before declaring them good, in Hebrew tov. But in that book, God seems answerable only to God, whereas Aristotle, surveying ethical life, questions his community, sorts the replies, reports, and stands ready to continue the conversation. I take Aristotle's example to be the live option for philosophy, which means that the goods it finds are hypotheses in experiments to be continued in the bearings of its addressees, namely you, me. Mid-shot. This is your traditional shot. Today's hypothesis is that friendship involves and discloses life at its better. It is not only worth pursuing, but what is found there opens paths of moral maturation that should be furthered and intensified. Not that we should all be friends, we can't. But the people we become in and through friendship are a partial answer to my opening query, when are you at your better? Friendship names a particular way of interacting with another or set of others. It is one way in which we bear our sociality. There are more, some compatible with friendship, some not. Hence the cluster of words that help frame friendship. Ally, companion, acquaintance, enemy, stranger, and lover, to name some of friendship's associated contrasting terms. What distinguishes friendship is how it disposes us toward one another, with a kind of love, philane in Greek, which they contrast with erotic desire. On my view, at least three tendencies animate friendship's love: attraction, goodwill, and voluntary affiliation. I'm going to say a little bit about what I think each of those involves. Most agree that friendship begins with a particular kind of attraction. We like, even prefer, the company of friends. But the language of preference, which involves the bestowal of favor, may obscure the phenomenon, given its unidirectional emphasis. Also, we prefer the company of friends because of the felt attraction, so the term comes too late to explain. This is a side, very particular spat with people who think they can predict all of our behavior according to preferences. Right? I think preferences often come later than other things which are really motivating us. So it isn't that I don't prefer the company of my friends, but that doesn't explain why we're friends. I prefer them because of this attraction, and I want to dig into that. I know it's late, but I am drinking coffee. Okay. A kind of magnetism operates in friendship. We are drawn to one another, like the narrator in Elizabeth Bishop's Gwendolen, who is fascinated by her friend all the way down to, quote, her beautiful name. Its dactyl trisyllables could have gone on forever, as far as I was concerned. But the tug is more than aesthetic. It is often easier to be with friends. We relax and are less calculating or self-conscious in their company. In fact, the presence of a friend can be disarming. We find ourselves discussing things we keep from others, even from ourselves at times. It is as if friendship's ease opens our spigots. Time with friends is also livelier. Aspects of ourselves and the world intensify in the presence of friends. A stranger's silly hat, how a friend laughs or dives into dinner, the perfect light of an autumn night. And this holds for all three of the friendship types proposed by Aristotle, from use to pleasure to character. Whether in study groups or administrative committees, that's use. Whether watching films or playing video games, that's pleasure. Or addressing the challenges of family, professional, and political life, a friend's presence refracts what transpires. A friend joins a meeting, and a colleague's drone initiates the giggles. A friend joins you to watch a film you love, and you fix on the less brilliant bits. A friend asks after you, and you realize you're still pissed about work. Friends see and hear through one another. And so, not only is life easier with friends, but more acute. As an intensifier, friendship is also a generative site. In it, we find that more can be done with what is at hand, which may be why a boring day of errands can become a buoyant jaunt with a friend in tow. The magnetics of friendship are thus manifold. Its attractions not only draw us together, but prove transformative. Goodwill deepens the attractions of friendship. We wish our friends well, and their suffering causes us a kind of pain. In the context of Aristotle's three kinds, this again obtains. We wish to be useful to those of use, otherwise we only use them. We want friends of pleasure also to be pleased by the shared event. And we fervently hope that friends of character find happiness across the breadth and length of their lives. Do not wish too passively, however. The goodwill of a friend is concrete, even proactive. When things go poorly for friends, we redress them. We also generate useful, pleasurable, and enriching circumstances for our friends, whether through invitations, gifts, aid, or honest work. Friends look out for one another, not just protect them from or remedy harm. If a friend never calls you, you wonder. And a good friend sees you in situations even when you are not there. I saw this and immediately thought of you. And this could be anything from a meme to a job opportunity. You might be thinking, but attraction and goodwill are present among associations that do not rise to the level of friendship. No doubt, although there are many ways to be friends, providing we get a charge in their company and wish them well. Regardless, I think another condition runs through friendship: voluntary affiliation. I want affiliation to capture some of what Aristotle means when he says that friends choose to live together. But I don't want to be too literal, as the narrator seems to be in Elizabeth Bowen's The Death of the Heart. Quote, "For the senses bound our feeling world. There is an abrupt break where their power stops. When the door closes, the train disappears round the curve, the plane's droning becomes inaudible, the ship enters the mist or drops over the line of the sea. The heart may think it knows better. The senses know that absence blots people out. We have really no absent friends. The friend becomes a traitor by breaking, however unwillingly or sadly, out of our own zone." I suppose the issue revolves around what delimits our zone. And no doubt technology has enlarged it in ways that Bowen, writing in 1938, might not have imagined, although her narrator is far less impressed with letters than many living a century earlier. While friends can be roommates and live near each other, I also have in mind everything from online gaming to talking on the phone to beers at the pub. You thus can think of our zone more as temporal than as spatial, of living as a matter of time, for in part that's what it is, what we are, an allotment of time, which friends spend together. We even say that friends make time for one another. But the affiliation in question runs deeper than this. Friends not only live with one another, but for one another. When we are friends, your well-being is one of the ends that orient my actions, particularly when they bear on or could your well-being. If someone is talking smack behind your back, I intercede. When I'm hunting records and find one you might want, I text and ask if you want me to pick it up. When you are looking to change jobs, I use my influence to make sure you get a shot, and so forth. The lives of friends are joint projects. To a degree, they live for one another, not just with one another, and willingly. The voluntary is a key category in Aristotle's ethics, but I have something in mind that is broader and more complex, although the two are compatible. Let me begin in the negative. The voluntary is neither coerced nor purchased. If you pay me to hang out with you, we are something other than friends. If I hang around to avoid a beating, same deal. When friends share time, when they live together, they do so voluntarily, as when we seek out the company of friends on a Friday night or do them a favor without them having to ask us for it. Let me take another step down this via negativa, which nevertheless discloses something positive. Friends commit to one another in a manner that isn't derived from any standing obligation, as it is with family members and fellow citizens. Friends do not meet, therefore, under the rule of law, natural or positive. In a way, in this series, you're getting a Kantian path toward one point, and I'm headed toward another point, but not in a Kantian manner. Right, so here, friends do not meet, therefore, under the rule of law, right, or obligation. Yes, we have obligations to our friends, but nothing obliges me to befriend another, even when I like them. And nothing obliges me to maintain a friendship. I owe an account if I end it, but no contract is broken when I say the thrill is gone, or I am no longer that person and neither are you. In short, an affiliation of friendship manifests a particularly intense exercise of freedom with and for another. Friends are free birds that fly together. As I see it, commitment, this kind of commitment, fuses friendship. One might be attracted to another, wish them well, but elect to pursue other friends like family, work, worship, activism, etc. But one says with one's actions, dear friend, when among all that one can do with them, one shares time and energy, one's life, with another. That's what I mean by voluntary affiliation. But I do not want to say too much. Why exactly are we attracted to one person and not another? If a man should importune me to give a reason why I loved him, Montaigne writes, I find it could no otherwise be expressed than by making answer, because it was he, because it was I. There is, beyond all that I am able to say, I know not what inexplicable and fated power that brought on this union. This strikes me as exaggerated, but I agree that friendly attraction is riddled with opacity. And so one also exaggerates if one claims you can choose your friends but not your family. However, given the attraction, you can choose to make and spend time with and for another. In closing this partial sketch of friendship's salient features, let me stress that friendship is an interaction. It names a relationship, not one's feelings for another. If only I think we're friends, we're not. If we never spend time together or do so rarely, we are friends in name only. Finally, as Derrida has argued, friendships must be sustained, which I think we see indirectly. I can't believe you said that to me. I thought we were friends. Or we just fell out of touch. Friendship is fragile and can end at any moment, which suggests that it is preserved interaction by interaction. Emerson has claimed that the most fugitive deed in word, the mere doing of a thing, the intimated purpose, expresses character. The same holds for friendship. And as with character, friends become, usually incrementally, sometimes suddenly, what they do with, for, and sometimes to another. Two shot. You've got two people in this frame. It is customary to explicate the goods brought about by friendship. At least four come to mind. Companionship, a basic felt need for social animals. Recognition, which empowers self-esteem, self-trust, and ambition. Material as well as emotional care. and proactive benevolence, which expands our horizons of opportunity. And through these, friendship empowers us to pursue whatever other goods make a life admirable and worth living. Friends buoy and rejuvenate the weary and can inspire those doubting themselves. Friends soften losses and aid recovery. As noted, friends not only make time but opportunity as well, and they come through when we need them. As Cole Porter would have friends sing, "When you're ever in a jam, here I am." It would be difficult to argue that we are better off without friends, therefore. I thus want to venture a different hypothesis based on what we've seen thus far. So low angle. Return to the thought that friendship's voluntary affiliation is neither contractual in nature nor based on a pre-existing obligation. It is a good whose pursuit eludes basic patterns of ethical life, therefore, namely that of duties and the imperatives or agreements that institute them. And not just regarding friendship's attractions. When I show goodwill toward my friends, I do so in a manner that acknowledges their singularity. In Marilyn Friedman's words, friendship, quote, acknowledges the uniqueness of the friend and can be said to honor or celebrate that uniqueness, close quote. And this contrasts with how we meet under the rule of law, which governs classes of actions directed toward classes of those with legal standing. Now you might object and say, but friends constitute a class of persons. And that's true, but explicitly treat two friends as interchangeable and you will probably lose them both. Or if I treat you as if you were no different than someone else, say a former friend who moved away, you will feel misrecognized and grow resentful as my purported goodwill misses you. The poet Auden carefully closes the poem for friends only with a good night wish. May you fall at once into a cordial dream, assured that whoever slept in this bed before was also someone we like. That within the circle of our affection, also you have no double. My claim is that navigating friendship requires us to inhabit an attraction and exercise our goodwill toward another beyond the scripts offered by duties. Nor can we simply rely on conventions, and for the same reason. Conventions no doubt shape a friendship's evolving character, and sadly, certain conventions squelch attractions in ways that continue to expose the ethical poverty of our culture. But no convention of affiliation is necessary for friendship, let alone sufficient for it. Our attractions are more anarchic than that, our needs as well. Moreover, conventions render us substitutable relative to the class they convene, which undermines friendship. This may be why Hegel has nothing positive to say about friendship. His conscience moves between the universals of convention and the universals of law. As with the freedom of its affiliations, friendship's bearing toward singularity discloses currents that have implications for ethical life that are worth elaborating. Because friendship orients us towards other in their singularity, it entails what we might call an epistemology of love, one that labors to know the other in their specificity and to know how to care for them in a manner that acknowledges their specificity. Crucially, this does not entail treating them through a general category like human being at the expense of how they are positioned socially. To the degree being so positioned constitutes the character of their existence, one only knows them by acknowledging that positioning. But neither does it reduce them to that positioning. It also looks for how they bear it, and to the degree possible, it bears with them through those complex negotiations. If this sounds right to you, you may be in for a surprise. An epistemology of love refuses the golden rule. One should only love a neighbor as oneself if, in fact, your neighbor is very much like oneself. But where they differ, whether in their positioning or how they bear it, one must love them as themselves. Importantly, an epistemology of love is an alternating current. Friends learn from each other relative to the goods of use, pleasure, or character in which they meet. It cannot be a joint project if one party brings nothing to the dance. Second, I very much doubt a friendship would survive if one party discovered that the other thought them dim-witted relative to the good in question, and not just in friendships of use. Film buffs might not care whether someone knows the physics of light. But if you thought me an idiot about films, my pleasure in shared viewings would diminish. I would wonder why you were there and doubt the sincerity of your goodwill. I might even realize, oh, I'm just here for the inevitable lecture. It shouldn't surprise us that friends are vulnerable to each other's regard. In a manner grounded in mutual affection, friends relate to themselves through that regard, which is a second way in which friendship is a spectacle. The first, which I have employed over the last few minutes, uses friendship to magnify aspects of ethical life. But now the claim is that friends are vantage points from which to consider new possibilities and redirections, from passing fancies to technical solutions to character traits. Moreover, even when we agree upon the details, friends can keep us honest about the strength of our commitment, our means, even our true motives. A friend is a spectacle in a third sense that becomes apparent when we begin to appreciate their singularity. Each of us is a manifold, an ongoing collision of social roles and eco-social histories that we navigate. A friend is always more than the set of traits that initiated our attraction, therefore, which is why Emerson claims, treat your friend as a spectacle. Of course, he has merits that are not yours and that you cannot honor if you must need hold him close to your person. Stand aside, give those merits room, let them mount and expand. Not only do our children and students have their own paths to find, friends also have courses that diverge from our own. In each of my friends, C.S. Lewis infers, there is something that only some other friend can bring out. Close quote. Acknowledging differences in a friend is thus an ongoing complex process, one that may teach us something about ourselves, one that may require us to listen with tenderness, and one that may lead us to wish them well as they find other attractions that help them realize who they are becoming. Thinking of friends in the fullness of the spectacle, their diversity, but also treating them as these, makes me suspicious about best friends. So I don't know if this was growing up in the post-punk movement or being from New Jersey, but there's certain things that are generally held in very high esteem, and so I like to poke at them. So why am I not so keen on best friends? Not only are we positioned in various ways, but each positioning is partial, one surface upon a multifaceted gem. Moreover, we change as we enter new relations and even as we age. Particularly over time, friends intersect at oblique angles, which suggests that we should commit to a range of friends, a range as broad and diverse as our own life. And it may be that we do. Have you ever gathered a group of friends only to find that they don't quite connect? The reason why seems easy to fathom. Each connects with a different dimension of our lives, and so misses the rest. None of my friends share all of my enthusiasm, save for soccer, silly jokes, poetry, argument, and music, too, and then different kinds of music. My rocker friends don't like ambient drone. We let ourselves out piecemeal, Randolph Bourne observes, so that only with a host of varied friends can we express ourselves to the fullest. Close quote. If this is true, then the best friend may unnecessarily limit what friendship can generate rather than stand as friendship's consummation. It may even frustrate the better if the emergence of new attractions is treated as a betrayal. I'm sure many of us had a best friend who got a little pissed when we started hanging out with someone else. But, you might suggest, my examples seem like friendships of pleasure, possibly of use, whereas the best friend is a friend of character, and that friendship is held together by shared virtues like sense of justice and generosity. I see the point, insofar as it reminds me that friends come together for multiple reasons, some tied to basic ethical commitments. We stand for the same things. But even in such cases, friends round out each other through a greater capacity for certain virtues. Moreover, we all lack certain excellences. As Keats puts it, the best of men have but a portion of good in them. Moreover, there are probably goods that have gone missing from or are weakly represented in our upbringing, just as compassion and forgiveness are troublingly absent from Aristotle's ethics. Even friendships of character are thus likely to face a partiality that a broader range of affiliations might amend. But the point is controversial. Major figures in the philosophy of friendship favor identity over differences among friends. But in the friendship I speak of, Montaigne declares, they mix and work themselves into one piece with so universal a mixture that there is no more sign of the seam by which they were first conjoined. Close quote. I don't want to say that's impossible, although I do think the claim has a whiff of BS and courts disappointment over time. But more tellingly, the dream is undesirable. Such friendships are echo chambers that contract a friend's dilating pedagogical power. Moreover, it narrows the goodwill of friends to points of agreement and identity, and that seems to me a feeble, even narcissistic sort of love. Aristotle is famous for suggesting that a friend is another self. But why not one that keeps you growing, expanding, one who exposes you to what you otherwise might have missed, and who corrects your near and farsightedness? Two heads are only better than one if they differ. And as Marilyn Friedman observes, a friend most likely will, quote, reveal a moral perspective that is, at least to some extent, unlike one's own, close quote. I can concede this much. If one is already equal to the world, yes, seek a twin. But to the degree that we are creatures of finitude, characterized by our limits as well as our powers, even friends of character are likely to differ in several ways, and productively so. By sowing differentiation into friendship's goodwill, I side with romantics like Blake and Emerson, who find a bit of the enemy in the best friendships. Charm me sweet with your fire, sings Joan Shelley. Singe the sugar in my bowls. What was sure has turned bitter, what renews can let go. Her song, Spur, just came out, provides a fine metaphor for a friendship that embraces alterity and is enlarged in turn. But remember, friendship is an interaction. Friends are spurs for one another. It isn't just that you, my friend, broaden my horizons with what you say and do, and through what your life discloses about the values you affirm. Although I agree with Marilyn Friedman that friendships provide these opportunities for growth. On her view, a friend is something of an ethics lab. Rather, the goodwill of friendship reciprocally spurs friends toward the good, including ongoing discoveries and inventions, as well as the revisions of what that good entails. This is even true of friendships and pleasure. Imagine friends of pleasure and one said, oh, I discovered all these awesome films, but I decided not to tell you about them. So, ethical growth doesn't simply result from friendship. It serves as one end of that joint project. We wish each other well by broadening each other, from pleasures to new aids to emerging values worth experimenting with. I don't think Friedman would agree. She distinguishes commitment to another as a person from commitment to them based on their morals, aligning the former with friendship. But how does one distinguish someone as a person from what they hold dear, from what they regard as good for them? I take it you are in part what you stand for, and if I show no interest in that, I show limited interest in you. Also, how can I wish you well if I don't have a feel for what you think does well by you? Friedman oddly renders friendship extra-moral while celebrating its ability to facilitate moral growth. I would rather set friendship within a cone that opens from a narrow to a broader set of goods. In friendships of use and pleasure, we limit our goodwill to the goods that prove useful or generate pleasure. In a friendship of character, however, that goodwill expands to the whole person, including goods of use and pleasure. And as we've seen, one can do this without insisting on identity among the good that we find. In fact, refusing to require or even desire that identity may evidence a deeper commitment to the good, if that good is in fact plural and dynamic. By inclining us toward others in their singularity, and by thickening our attraction with an epistemology of love, one that funds a proactive goodwill, friendship initiates a maturation process of broad ethical value. To the degree a goodwill recognizes that persons are not substitutable, friendship is vital for moral education. But friendship has still more to offer our bearings. Among friends, my other regarding behaviors are also self-regarding behaviors. And so friendship eludes the egoism-altruism binary that haunts ethical life, particularly in cultures obsessed with the acquisition of wealth and prestige. In friendship, my friend's welfare is my interest. That is what living with and for another entails. If this seems too much, consider how you would regard a friend who proved indifferent to or resented your success, or proved indifferent to or relished in your sorrow. Not that we don't do this sometimes. Just consider how you feel when it happens. That would diminish the friendship, even lead you to question it. In friendship, we discover, I think, that our interests can lie with the good wherever it happens. Admittedly, realizing the transpersonal nature of the good requires maturation. Children first learn to play nice, which begins with sharing momentary but seemingly all-important obsessions. But over time, we get into each other's heads and hearts, and less through the intercession of parents and teachers than through interactions with those who attract our affections on the playground and outside school. And that affords us friendship's fourth moral lesson. Parsing the good with the question, yours or mine, remains stuck in the sandbox. Friendship shows us something better. Friendship is where we learn, outside the pressures of family and the generality of the rule of law, to care for another, to wish and treat them well to the point that we regard their well-being as integral to our own. Moreover, by sharing our days in this way, we are more ourselves than we otherwise would be. Friendship not only eludes the egoism-altruism binary, but it discloses how that binary contracts our very well-being. Reaction shot, which is this. I do not suggest that friendship provides a sufficient basis for ethical life. We can't all be friends. We can enact an epistemology of love for only a handful. Intimacy demands our full attention, which has limits. Also, affection is fickle. I like many who nevertheless lack the magnetism of a friend. It is unsurprising, therefore, that the friend-acquaintance distinction appears in multiple languages. It is a useful one. And no doubt there will be those I dislike. Ethical life meets with a wider range of people than the class friend can accommodate. And we must do right by all, not just those who start our engines. Note also that friendship introduces its own challenges, such as undue favoritism. I am certain you have heard someone explain away their friend's jerkish behavior with, "That's just John," to which one wants to say, "That's what I'm saying, John's a jerk." But if the principle of justice insists that we treat like cases alike, friendship teaches us to treat unlike cases differentially, and it nourishes the know-how which that requires. Friendship thus generates a sensibility that can amend one trapped in formal conceptions of justice, even as those conceptions can true the bearings of friendship. Fade. Something instructive begins to emerge in friendship, something worth intensifying outside the confines of its attractions. By throwing in together, we emerge more than we otherwise would have been, and in a way that shows us convincingly how to enlarge ourselves by caring for others with a singular loving affection. Now add to that how friendship enriches our bearing day in and day out, and you'll see why it is justly regarded as a bloom of sociality. Thank you for your attention.
We have time for some questions, and we have microphones to pass to whoever has a question. One has to sit with this for just a minute.
Who does your hair is always a good icebreaker.
Edward?
I saw a hand in the back, too. Yeah, please.
Well, this is a kind of silly question, but both in the structure of your talk and in your examples, it seems like a lot of your friendship circles around watching movies together.
Yeah.
I mean, so tell me about that.
Yeah, so actually I'm not a movie buff. My wife is a movie buff. And I partly created the structure in part for that. I just thought everyone could understand that as a friendship of pleasure. Like there's an activity you have in common, and you do it, and you see the movie together. So it's just such a rich example, I think, of you're there together, and you're seeing through each other's eyes. And I mean, the most other obvious one is sporting events. But I don't tend to think that they have the most positive impact on social life, so I want to go with films.
But just as a follow-up, can I share with you some of the most painful, and not terribly painful, but still painful moments in some of my friendships is when I've recommended a movie I loved, and my friends hate it. And that is not a very encouraging moment, but I think it illustrates some of what you're getting at.
Yeah, well, partly there, the question is, what do we do with that? I once anyway, I mean, yeah, and then you have to sort of talk it through. And how come? And I think it's a little test on the friendship. And it may be, if they say, I remember someone saying while watching one of these, Hollywood remarriage comedies that I love, all they do is talk. And my thought was, we're never going to be friends. Because it's just like, that's it. All they do is talk. That's what we do with our life. They're showing us life. We don't spend most of our life in car chases. We spend most of our life talking and trying to find each other through those mishaps. So I didn't really stress, at a certain point, you stop because of time. I do think in friendship, there's both this great power, but also this great vulnerability. And I think that's something we tend to diminish in ethical life. In trying to be ethical, and we're trying to be generous or care about others, we're exposing ourselves to harm. And a certain kind of conscience is, I have clean hands, I didn't do anything wrong. And the sense of ethical life I have is much more ambitious. We're trying to generate the better, but it's vulnerable. And it can be hard and hurtful. Or just befuddling. What do you mean you didn't like that movie? You're like, I'm just going to pretend you didn't say that, which I think friends say to each other. So anyway, I agree. I mean, but I'm glad you pressed that, because there's a real vulnerability there. But there's part of the beauty of it, isn't that, for me?
This may be sort of a shallow question, but I hope it actually illuminates some of your points. I guess, how would you distinguish friendships from romantic and sexual relationships, particularly when it comes to the voluntary affiliation point?
Yeah. So, so one of my favorite lines is Nietzsche was the Greeks were shallow out of profundity. So shallow could still really rock the house. But I think that's a great question. And I went over it a little too quickly when I talked about friendship and its contrasting terms. Some of them are complementary. But the principal distinction between eros and philane is philane is not, you don't want to get busy with the person. All right? It's just not a feverish attraction, and it feels differently. But there's nothing incompatible with eros and philane over time. It's just eros has a real, I'll put it differently. I love the idea of thinking about these as dispositions. How am I being positioned toward you? And in a way, making myself at your disposal, meaning you get to react and it may hurt me or help me or what have you. And eros and philane are dispositionally quite different. Could they overlap and come together? I think so. Although it's an interesting dynamic over time. Lovers, friends trying to become lovers, lovers becoming friends, and then maybe not so much lovers, So I think it's an important distinction, but it's not a contradiction. Does that get it? Is that a reply to the question?
I guess in particular, it seems in committed relationships, there's something interesting going on about the nature of affiliation in a romantic context that may not exist in the friendship context, as far as not having sort of, I guess, a contractual agreement of some sort. I guess in marriage, too, perhaps would be the example.
Yeah, I mean, I do think marriage is a specific articulation of set of vows. It's heavily regulated by convention and by the state. Most marriages bring those together. Sometimes people do those separately. What is the, where are you? I mean, I don't want to say these are the same thing. So is it that, in a sense, marriage is a fuller consummation of what I'm talking about in friendship? Is that what you're pressing?
I guess one way to put it would just be that it seems, at least by convention, easier to leave a friend in some context than like to leave a marriage, at least, right?
Yeah.
So there's like heavier obligations there, and they can maybe sometimes not feel as voluntary as you described.
Yeah. Let me. Yeah, I don't think it establishes a contract. And The Thrill Is Gone, which is more a song, a B.B. King song. There are a lot of songs in the talk. Partly because I think we condescend to what actually informs us ethically, which are things that don't all have the right super status of moral proclamations or big text, but we still live with them. So yeah, I do. Again, but to me, those are different kinds of relations. I do think, my initial thought, and not just initial, is that marriages work well when there's friendship there as well. But I would say those are exactly, I'll have an observation after this. That's rough, though, if that's everything. So my point about the best friend, I think, doubles down in the marital context. Although I will say there was a study, I read this probably 10 years ago, that once you get older, many men identify their wives as their best friend, and their wives don't identify their husbands as their best friends. But I agree with all that. But that's why I think there's something so amazing about friendship is we don't have to do it. We become these really amazing people without having to be told to behave. It's not an obligation. It's a free expression of what we think is really valuable. And we do it a lot, and we're good at it, and we know how to do it. And so I feel like there's an example there of being ethical that we could try to, how could I expand that energy somewhat and in these other kinds of contexts? Rather than have me run around looking for what obligations and duties do I have and grudgingly go along with them. I don't think that gets very far once you're past 10 years old.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask a question if there isn't anyone just now. So if the potential for moral education, for enlargement, is even greater in some ways with those that are different than us, and the friendships that we enter into originate with attraction, and we are more readily attracted to people who are like us, is there a responsibility to seek friendships beyond that attraction that initially seeds them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm puzzling on this now. I do think our attractions are more anarchic than that. I think people don't act on them. I sort of had a throwaway line about this. If I think about the way friendships lined up in my elementary school around race and class, and then what happened in middle school, and then what happened in high school where it's completely segregated, and you're like, how the hell did we get here? Is it because we all became such radically different people? BS, no way. other forces were operative. So I think our attractions are much more anarchic than the more general categories predictors would. And I think in part we're cowards. I think we don't pursue those. And we're unwilling to assume the difficulties that intensify as the world carves us up into those categories and tells us those are our people. That said, what I would say is acting on those attractions and those interests and those connections much more fulsomely. But there's something creepy about being an adult and saying, I need to diversify my social group, could we be friends? That's just using somebody. And so that's why friendship, the attraction has to be there. But this is why I started the way I did. Ethics only works if you get in your heart and you talk with yourself about where you live. And about where are those moments where those attractions are there. You're like, wow, I never really acted on that, or we never really got together. That's a conundrum for me, because I think what you're saying is right. It's just if we turn that into a program of personal life diversification, it's wrong. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's on this side that I'm worried about. I also another way to put it though is we get into ruts. We have our friends in our group, and I wouldn't trust that. I would how do you get out and continue to meet friends? Although as someone who moved after the age of 40, it gets tricky. And I'll tell you I know the main reason my wife and I will never leave Atlanta is we can't create a whole new group of friends as we turn 60. It's hard for us to imagine that would happen. So there is this kind of narrowing. But again, maybe I'm just too social. I think our attractions are much more vital than how we act. We allow them to be at the level of enactment. Does that count as a reply? I don't know if I missed. Swing and a miss, you could say, no, try again.
All right, do we have another question? I guess that's a wrap then. Thank you very much. And if you have a question, would like to come up. So I will look forward to seeing all of you next Thursday at 5 p.m. in the University Chapel for Seema Gajwani's lecture. Thank you for coming.